Hello, everyone. Welcome to the launch for Pacifique by Sarah Taggart. My name is James Lindsay. I'm the publicist and sales and marketing coordinator at Coach House Books, the press that was lucky enough to publish this book. I know some of you are having trouble getting in tonight. I'm sorry about that. We're just going to wait a minute or two until everyone's in. But how are you? I'm just stalling for time while I make sure everyone's in right now. We are so excited to be here tonight to be publishing this incredible book, Sarah's debut, and the first acquisition by one of our new acquisition editors, Amanda Leduc, author of Disfigured, on fairy tales, disability, and making space. But before we begin tonight, I am going to do a land acknowledgement for Toronto, which is where Coach House is based. We acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Hello. I'm going to introduce tonight's host, Amanda Leduc. What can I say about Amanda? Amanda is a disabled writer and author of the nonfiction book Disfigured on fairy tales, disability, and making space, which was published by Coach House in 2020. That long ago already, wow. And was shortlisted for the 2020 Governor General's Award. She is also the author of the novel The Miracles of Ordinary Men, published in 2013 by ECW. Her new novel, The Centre's Wife, is out now with Penguin Random House Canada. Everyone, Amanda Leduc. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, James. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's such a huge pleasure to be here today. Everyone who's joined us, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here to welcome this wonderful book into the world. I know you're excited as well. Just a couple of housekeeping items on my end. I wanted to acknowledge that I am zooming into this event today from the territory which is now known as Hamilton, but were traditionally the territories of the Wendat, the Huron, the Haudenosaunee, the Erie, and the Neutral, and the Mississaugas. And the area that I am in is known as the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, and it was part of an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. And I always like to start virtual events when I'm in Hamilton, or in-person events when I'm in Hamilton, with this, because I think speaking about care is particularly important when it comes to literature. In this particular case, with this particular book, it feels even more important to me. And so I just wanted to start with that. I wanted to also note, just as a visual descriptor for everybody who's watching and anybody who maybe is dialing in on the phone and doesn't have the screen access, I am a white woman with long curly brown hair, and I am wearing glasses and a black top. I walk with a limp. I'm not walking on the screen right now, obviously, but I do walk with a limp in my day-to-day. And without further ado, James, I will thank you again for your introduction of the evening. And now it is my turn to introduce the superstar of our night tonight, and that is Sarah L. Taggart. Sarah L. Taggart is a mad writer. She has published short fiction in the Malahat Review, the Fiddlehead, and the Journey Prize stories. Her short fiction won the Jack Hodgson's Founders Award for fiction and was an honorable mention in the Fiddlehead's annual fiction contest. Originally from Treaty 7 territory, Sarah now lives in Wellington, New Zealand, and is pursuing a PhD at the International Institute of Modern Letters. Pacifique is her first book. Welcome, Sarah Taggart.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Sarah. It is so wonderful to be here with you tonight, and I'm so excited to get in and talk about Pacifique and talk about how your life brought you to this book and how you brought this book to us in the world. just as a sort of idea for everyone who's watching how this will go, you have a little bit of a reading prepared. So we'll go through the reading and then Sarah and I have some questions. So we are going to go through a bit of a moderated Q&A. And then for everyone who's watching, you are welcome to put some questions in the Q&A box, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. I believe the chat function is also available, and Sarah has a note or two about the chat, which she will let everyone know. And that's how we're going to do this little celebration of this wonderful book. So Sarah, thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you, Amanda, for being my editor and my friend, and for guiding me through this journey and guiding me through this evening/lunch hour, depending where you are watching from in the world. So I'll just introduce myself and do a couple of land acknowledgements as well. Tēnā koutou katoa, no te rohe tiriti tuawhitu ahau, e noho ana au ki pito one, he tawira au ki te herenga waka, e whai ana au I te tohu kairangi tuhinga awaha, ko Sarah Taggart, tōku ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, hello. Thank you again, Amanda, and thank you, James and Coach House, for organizing this event. And thank you all for coming, all of you watching out there. I am a white woman. I'm wearing a sequin dress. I have dangly wooden and tealy green earrings. I'm wearing glasses. I have a shaved head that is colored blue and pink. And I'm going to turn around so that you can see the back. It's meant to be my book cover. So it's pink and blue and has some wavy little watermarks on the bottom. And there's a bicycle behind me and a stack of books also behind me. Given the virtual nature of our launch, I encourage you to reflect on the land or traditional territory on which you reside, and you can do so in the chat if you wish. Nativeland.ca, native-land.ca is a relatively good resource for mapping Indigenous lands, and Amanda is going to put a link to that in the chat. Before I read, I'd like to acknowledge the land where I was born and grew up, the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as the Tsuut'ina and First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Pacifique is set on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples and the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. So I'll now do a short reading from the second chapter of Pacifique. This is the first time that our two main characters, Andrew and Tia, meet. Does it count as a meet cute if it happens in a psych ward? Well, I guess you tell me. He sneaks a glance over his shoulder. The blonde watches him. Circles the color of ash underline each bloodshot blue eye. Her cheekbones stand out like cliffs in her hollow face. Andrew wonders when she last ate a proper meal. Psychosis-induced anorexia. Her crazy, a list of symptoms Andrew checks off in his head. She catches his eye and spits. Have you seen Pacifique? The words topple into each other like dominoes. Sorry, who? Sometimes it is fun to engage. Pacifique, her name is Pacifique. That's a beautiful name. Once upon a time, a woman named Beatrice lived in his head. She took care of him when his mother would not. He always thought Beatrice was the prettiest name. The woman in the wheelchair smiles at his comment and opens her mouth to speak. But no, I'm sorry, Andrew interrupts. I have not seen her. The woman's face collapses in on itself, a frightening metamorphosis of beauty, haggard, underfed beauty. He knows that look of hate, of someone being dismissed. He has worn that look. Before she can respond with words as hideous as her expression, he turns and stalks toward his room at the end of the hall. You've seen her, the woman shrieks at his retreating back. You have. He hears the high-pitched bark of rubber soles on hospital floor, a grunt of pain. He risks a look back. The woman lies on the ground. She tried to escape her chair, fell instead. "Come on, Tia, let's not do that," croons the head nurse. Andrew perches in his doorway, watching. The woman, legs crumpled, spine twisted, arms bent in a push-up, scans the hall. She sees him. Spit sparkles on her chin. She swipes a rough hand across her mouth. Andrew closes his door, shuts out her unrelenting stare. Into the dark room he shares with 3 other young men, now asleep and snoring through foggy, medicated dreams. He says, "Welcome to the madhouse, Tia."
Thank you so much for that. It's such a, I mean, the whole book is so immersive and so illustrative. I think of so many things that many people are not exposed to on a regular basis. And I think that's such a perfect, succinct peek at a lot of what goes on in the book. There's just layers and layers and layers of wonderful things that are going on. Some of the people at the launch event tonight know you, of course, and some probably do not. And so I wondered if we could start things off sort of as just kind of like an open discussion, and just have you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how your life as a writer brought you to Pacifique, and what it was about this story that has stuck with you for so long.
Yeah, well, I have been writing or storytelling since I was little, as many of us writers have. And honestly, when I was thinking about university, I always wanted to go, after I hit about 16, I always wanted to go study writing at university. So I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, a Master of Fine Arts, and now I'm working on a PhD in creative writing. It's one of the only things that I'm any good at. So I keep going back to school for it. And but originally I was writing short fiction. So I wrote a lot of short fiction when I was at the University of Victoria, where I got my BFA and where I met you, Amanda. And as you mentioned, I published that short fiction. But then I had an experience that inspired me to write Pacifique. And it was just always a novel. So, and it goes all the way back to 2004. I had a bike accident, much like Tia does, and I had a concussion, and I lost about 20 minutes of my memory. And when I came to, the first thing that I said was, "Where's Paul?" And Paul was the person that I was cycling with. And he said, "Hello, I'm here. I'm in the front seat of the ambulance." But in that moment between my question and him answering, there was this massive space of what if. And Paul actually said to me afterwards, he said, "What if you had asked where I was?" And I had said, I wasn't, and I had said nothing because I wasn't there. And it was just this amazing idea of what if you, someone important in your life just all of a sudden disappeared. And not just that, but there was no record of that person ever existing. Wouldn't it drive you mad? And because of my own experience being locked up and psychiatrized, I knew what would happen to a person who had such beliefs. They would wind up in the psychiatric system. They would wind up in a psychiatric hospital. And I could tell that part of the story too. And for whatever reason, it was always just a novel. It was never going to be a short story. So, but yeah, it's been a long time that I've been working on this novel. But that's kind of how, I've gotten to here.
That's wonderful. I love that you start with talking about that moment in 2004, because I also remember, maybe it was 2000 later in 2004, or maybe 2005, when we were at school together. I remember we were in Victoria, and you had gone on a trip to Toronto, I think to visit Paul. Paul of the time, and you came back, and I remember had gone for coffee or something, and you had a notebook in front of you, and you sat down and you went, "Look," and you opened the novel and you started going through the pages, and you were like, "Novel, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is cool. This is really, really great." And it's so wonderful to me, because this is we're going on like 16, 17 years ago now. Can you talk a little bit about the process of carrying that novel through all of those years, and how, what are some things about it that changed? What are some things that stayed the same? You know, are there moments from that initial notebook that you were leafing through and super excited about that ended up in the final draft?
That's a really good question. I went looking for that notebook. I think it's probably in things that are still in Canada. So I couldn't find it to actually confirm what that original outline looked like. But yeah, even from the state of having an idea, which that was 2004, to then writing up that, being inspired to write an entire outline in 2005. And then what I did was I submitted an outline and a first chapter to Bill Gaston for his novel workshop. That happened at some point. And then Bill actually didn't mark it. It was Devin Krukoff who marked it, and he gave me an A-, and I was disappointed that I didn't get an A because I thought it was such a great story. And then I probably at that point just put it aside, and then I would pick it up every now and again. I did a couple of National Novel Writing Months with it, and I just start from scratch and write 40 or 50,000 words. And then the next year, start again from scratch and write it again. And then again, put it down for months or possibly years at a time. So the way that it became what it is now, that sort of version didn't come about until I started my Master of Fine Arts. And so January 2013, I started again from scratch, but with this idea, and wrote the manuscript that's quite similar to what we have now. Wrote that basic fundamental manuscript from January to about September of 2013 under the guidance and mentorship of Dave Margoshes, to whom I'm extremely grateful, because it was just, it was an amazing working relationship to get it into the shape that it is. And then that was still almost 10 years ago, right? Like, that's still a long time that I've been working on it. And again, I put it aside. I sent it to agents rejected it. I put it down. I sent it to more agents, and agents rejected it. That whole story. I sent it out to publishers. And then I did more edits on it. Like, as you know, it's if I tried to count the edits, I don't even know if I'd be able to. So, and then you sent me an email, and the rest is history. Okay. So that's kind of what I can remember of a very, very long process.
It's wonderful. And I think I'm so glad that you were able to share that story. I mean, glad that you're able to share the book with us, and then also to share, that side of the story to it too, because I think certainly in writing at university, and when you're a young writer starting out, I feel like, and especially now in today's age of social media and all that, there's a lot of focus and a lot of stories. It feels like, you sort of, with these writers that kind of hit it coming right out of the gate, and then they publish these books and, garner wide acclaim. It's almost right from the get-go. And of course, obviously, even in those stories, someone is like workshopping, redoing a manuscript and working it over again and again and again. There's never really an instant success kind of story in this kind of work that we do. But I think, we don't talk enough about the stories that take a long time to grow and to gestate and to move into the world. And we don't talk enough about that kind of journey as a writer, and what it is to, go through, write those stories right from the beginning to the end, over and over and over again. And I'm really, really grateful that, you felt that you could share that experience with us. And so thank you for that. I know as an editor, one of the things that I loved about reading Pacifique, certainly for the first time, when I was looking at it with my editorial hat on, was finishing it that first time and realizing that it had really changed the way that I viewed the world. Certainly with respect to some things about, the psychiatric experience and the experience of psychiatrization, which I hadn't known. I'd had some experience of, but certainly not to the extent, that is gone into in the book. And I just in respect to, madness and this idea that the sort of polite society has around reality, quote unquote, I hadn't thought about the world in those ways before. And it was just such a wonderful feeling of coming away from the book and being like, my world feels so much larger now as a result. And I feel like I have been gifted something here in reading this book. And I think part of that's, something that the very best books do. And so much of the world changing nature of Pacifique is due to you and your bravery as a writer in tackling some of these topics, tackling some of these things that really kind of remain hidden. Alicia Elliott, who gave a wonderful blurb for your book, talked about that as well, right? The book really does force the reader in a very gentle, beautiful, lyrical way to see things that are often kept from the world. And so I wondered, given all of that, sorry, I know I can be rambly when I lead up to my questions. What did you want the reader to see and think and feel in coming away from your book?
I don't think I wanted a particular feeling. That I think is our own individual experience. But I did hope that I could show them the just a tiniest ounce of insight into what it might be to live with a mental health diagnosis, mm-hmm. or to live with an experience of psychiatrization. If they had even just a touch more understanding of what that feels like for other people, mm-hmm. For MAD people or people who identify as mentally ill, then I had done my job as a writer. And I also wanted to show the structures, the institutions that these realities play out in. I wanted to show, it was really important for me to show quite a lot of the, or set quite a lot of the novel inside a psychiatric institution, because it's I mean, frankly, it's a terrifying place. Mm-hmm. And I wanted people to know that it was terrifying, not because it's inhabited by crazy people, but it's terrifying for the crazy people, mm-hmm. Because they are there, often they are there against their will. They're receiving treatment, so-called treatment and medication against their will. They're receiving labels that they don't agree with, that they have no input into. And it's a label and stigma that's, even though we're all into anti-stigma campaigns and all that BS, I will try not to swear, BS, it's highly stigmatized to have spent time in a mental institution. So it's a very scary place to be a patient. I can tell you that. So I wanted to be able to give the reader just a sense of that. And also, of course, the humanity of MAD people, our humanity. We are a maybe not gifted is not the right word, but we have a breadth of experience that I think gives us a bit of a different take on reality in the world. And it's worthwhile to tell that story.
Mm-hmm. And you do it with two characters in Pacifique, right? You've got the main character, Tia, who has this experience of so-called psychosis, according to the doctors and to the, individuals around her. And then there is a patient named Andrew, whom she meets when she's on the psych ward. And the novel delves into his story too. So we have interlacing chapters that speak about both of them. And both Tia and Andrew have the so-called scary, if you will, diagnoses. There are certainly diagnoses that are perceived as scary by the outside world. And a lot of the books that we have, certainly in mainstream society, about madness kind of deal with madness almost as a small m in a way. There is not a lot that delves into these kind of deeper questions and deeper looks at the diagnoses. And I wonder the grave and gritty reality of how the psychiatric system deals with psychosis in particular is not really talked about outside of the system. And obviously that needs to change. So what was important to you, and you sort of touched on this a little bit, but in portraying this reality and these characters, what was important to you about getting that experience in particular across to your reader?
Yeah, as someone who has experienced psychosis, it was important for me to portray characters who had experienced psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to portray psychosis that was valued.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to show that a person's so-called psychotic episode to the outside world might seem like complete lack of reality and just completely other. But in fact, my opinion is that a psychotic state might actually be simply another reality that the average person just doesn't have access to. It's also not an entirely unpopular opinion. Not all so-called psychotic symptoms are medicalized or psychiatrized. It depends where you are in the world. It depends what kind of access to help you have, what kind of community you grow up in.
Mm-hmm.
There's a group called the Hearing Voices Movement, which is about people who are voice hearers who don't agree that it should be medicalized or psychiatrized. There are alternatives to the psychiatric model for a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wanted to share the fear that people who are having psychotic episodes feel, not necessarily because of the psychosis itself, but because of their interaction with the outside world while having this experience. So law enforcement is often involved, and that can be very dangerous to patients, to people with mental health challenges. People with mental health challenges and the police do not go very well together. And if you're encountering the psychiatric system and you are in a psychotic state, there's a very high chance that you will be locked up and you will be medicated, and these things will be done against your will because you're deemed not to have you're not deemed not able to speak for yourself or have any opinion. You're in your own care. And that's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And I can say that from experience. So it was necessary for me to tell a story that dealt with that, because it's still the scary part, like you said, of mental health. And if we can't talk about the scary stuff, we don't really have any hope about any of it. And I also wanted, what was also important to me was I'm not just writing for sane people, for people who don't have mental health challenges. I'm also writing for people who have had these experiences, and I want them to see themselves represented in literature. So that was really important to me as well.
And so much of what you talk about has to do with language as well. And of course, we come at language in particular ways as writers. And I think we also come at language in particular ways from elements of lived experience. Many people who are watching or who are familiar with, disability rights movements and those kinds of things will know that, lame, for example, and just a content note that some language will be discussed probably over the next 5 minutes or so that can be a little bit difficult. Lame is certainly, a word that I find really, really difficult. And it's tossed out so flippantly and often so frequently by people who wish to express displeasure over something. That's so lame is practically ubiquitous in the language that we use today. And people who use it often do so without knowing the deeper origins of the word. They don't recognize, or maybe they don't know, that it comes from, referring to someone who has a physical disability as lame, as being somehow incomplete. And the language transfers to the insult as saying, oh, that's so lame, meaning that's something that's flawed or something that's, not great. And it's difficult because people don't think about this language that they're using. And, I see it a lot in disability rights and disability focused language. And I certainly see it a lot in language around madness. And like you were saying, these words have stigma that just attaches to them and does not leave because the wider world does not allow it to leave. The wider world is perfectly happy on some level with the amount of stigma that attaches to these words that we use. And I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about what it is like for you watching language around madness and sanist language in particular. With disability, we call language that is discriminatory toward disability ableist language. And with madness, sanist language is the term that is often used. Can you talk a little bit about how language factors into all of this for you and your own experience?
Yeah, everybody who knows me will know that I actually cringe when people use the word crazy. It's and almost never are they referring to the experience of someone who has a mental health challenge.
Mm-hmm.
In New Zealand, in Aotearoa, it might be sometimes mad, the word mad, insane, and it's just, I just feel like we have gotten a little bit, we've gotten a bit lazy with our language. We have failed to really take into account what our words mean. And even though I'm surrounded by intelligent and worldly and writerly people who use words for a living, in fact, some of them use words for a living or are trying to make a living at it. But it's just such easy shorthand. Mm-hmm. And that shorthand is hurtful. Mm-hmm. Because every time I hear someone say that's so insane, or the traffic was crazy, or the weather was mad, or that guy is psycho, or my girlfriend, I have a psycho ex-girlfriend, mm-hmm. or something, it's just all I hear is that person doesn't care that there are people in the world who have real mental health challenges, who are crazy people, like myself, who are trying to reclaim those words as points of agency and points of pride, mm-hmm. and they're not meant to be used as to denigrate or devalue someone else's experience. So if you want to describe the traffic or the weather, you can probably describe it accurately. There's nothing insane about, a lot of cars on a highway, mm-hmm. and there's nothing insane about our weather. Climate change is real, so we know what's happening. It's not outside of reality. It is definitely in this reality that we all share. So I just like to encourage people to think about that word, crazy, mad, insane, psycho, and think, is there something better that I can use? Especially, if you have children in your life, that's a kind of a big thing. Yeah, it's a pet peeve. You will hear from me about it.
Yeah. And I mean, people should hear from you about it, right? Like we all need these constant reminders about the power of language, I think, because there's a real tendency to have willfully forgotten the power inherent in language and inherent in the words we use.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. For my next question, it's not really a question so much as it is a little bit of show and tell. So I am just going to share my screen here, a little bit of magic sharing, and then also traveling back in time. Mm-hmm. For those who are watching, for anyone who, again, is dialing in and doesn't have access to the screen, what is on the screen now is a picture of 4 white women sitting at a table in a restaurant. The restaurant happens to be the Superior in Victoria, and we are in, I think it's 2006 in this photo. Okay. And from left to right, it's myself, and then Sarah, and then a woman with blonde hair beside Sarah, who is Deborah Willis, the writer Deborah Willis, and then Marjorie Salona is the person on the end with long dark hair, and Marjorie is also a writer as well. And I bring this up because all four of us went to the University of Victoria together as writers. And having writer friendships as we were growing together as writers and learning about language has been so important for me. And it has been such a gift to grow as a writer and, watch my friends grow and put these beautiful books out into the world and just have these wonderful publishing opportunities. And I wondered, Sarah, if that has held true for you as well. What is important and has been important to you about writer friendships, and how they have carried you through the messy business of being a writer in the world.
Yeah, it is a solitary venture, so you need your friendships in order to make it something that's not so solitary. One thing that is the only reason that I have written most of what I've written in my life is the actual writing workshop that I've encountered in university. I think the writing workshop is a hallowed place where amazing things happen, and having that support and that collegiality and so many writers in one room who all just want you to get your writing to its best place. And then also writing groups beyond that, and having friends who you can just have a conversation with at any time about writer's block or meeting deadlines or not meeting deadlines or having just a mess of stuff. And I've got old writing and I don't know if it's any good, but I've got this new idea and you can't even keep track of your own project and you're just venting. It's invaluable to have that kind of relationship and connection. And it is pretty amazing that all the people at this table in this photograph are now real writers, published authors with, you all have multiple books. I've got one now. So yeah.
We've all done it. We've all
we have.
We stuck it out and we relied on each other in various ways and in various capacities over the years. And I think it's, publishing can be such a tricky business, and the writing road is a very tumultuous one. And sometimes the only thing that you have to hold on to are those friendships and the writing workshops and the people who you can come to and cry on. So I wanted to give thanks for that in this sacred space that we are in today, because I think that is part of the reason why things like the extraordinary Pacifique are possible, is friendships like this.
That's true.
And so I have one more question, and I just wanted to give a heads up to the audience that if you have any questions for Sarah, please do feel free to put them in the Q&A box. I am going to ask my last question and we'll discuss that here, and then we'll move to a couple of questions from the audience. So again, please, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. Put them in the Q&A and we will definitely see if we can get to them. My last question is about the beautiful cover of Pacifique. Of course, part of the process of writing a book is figuring out what it looks like in the world and then dyeing your hair to match your book's cover. That is a process that all writers go through. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to, settle on a cover for Pacifique and what that has meant for you to see the book in its sort of physical form out in the world?
Yeah. Natalie Olson is the designer of the cover, and I was so impressed with her process. She read the book and then she came to us with I had given her no ideas. Alana Wilcox, editorial director at Coach House, asked me, "Do you have ideas?" And I said, "I have none, sorry." And so Natalie had no guidance. She just went in and started designing. And a very similar cover to the one that we ended up with came through in the first go round, along with two completely different ones. So there was these 3 covers that were all totally different. But there was just something about this, especially about this cover, especially Natalie's description of where its inspiration came from. So she was inspired by the water of Victoria, by the sea, and she was inspired by Pacifique's eye, as it's described in an early scene, which meant a lot to me. And then we went back and forth, changing a few things here and there. I really liked the typeface. My friend Jenny said that she thought that the byline should be up at the top. Originally, it was lower down. So that's why we have my name up at the top of the book. I asked all sorts of friends for their ideas, and I asked for a darker blue, and I think I might have asked for a brighter pink. Anyway, the pink is amazing. So I'm just totally in awe at how it ended up. But basically I put my trust in the designer, and I was rewarded for that trust. I think it's a fantastic cover, and it really says to me Pacifique. I don't know if everybody feels that way about their book covers, but it's like that's the only cover that Pacifique could have. Yeah.
I love it too. And I remember being with you as we were going through the various versions of the cover and having this one come up and just having this visceral wow feeling. Like it hits so many things about the book and the mood of the book in particular. Like it's beautiful. And every single time I see it, I feel like I fall more in love with it. And also grateful to Natalie, who is a great cover designer, a really, really extraordinary artist. And she did right by Pacifique. She really, really did. So we have some questions in the Q&A box.
Okay.
We're gonna move to those now. So the first question is from Sarah, who says, over the course of the many drafts, did you have and stick to a plot outline, or did you write in a less structured way? And did that affect how you knew how to end the book? It's a great question.
That's a good question. I always was quite organized, but I didn't know what was going to happen at the end. So I did have a very strict plot. And so I was able to sit down and write every day for days on end and months on end. I had like a word count limit that I had to reach every day in order to stop working. So I would sit down with my coffee and my peanut butter cookie, and I would write to this outline. But it just sort of faded away to like end. That I didn't know what the end was going to be. And in fact, one day, probably in August-ish of 2013, I was writing, and I was feeling that real like rush, that real flow state of writing where you're just on fire. And I wrote the end. I looked at my computer, I was like, oh my gosh, that's the end. So I sent it immediately to my mentor and I said, I've written the end. And he wrote right back and he said, no, you haven't. So that was Dave. So Dave wrote back, no, you haven't. I'm like, oh, but it felt so right. It was like this magical moment. It's the end. And then I left the coffee shop and I kind of thought on it. And I just sat down the next day and I was like, okay, I guess it's not the end. And he was right. It wasn't quite the end. So I kept writing until the end did appear. I wasn't far off. I was almost finished, but I wasn't quite there. So that's kind of how I plotted this or wrote this book. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. A next question comes from Joy. And the question is, are there any plans for an audiobook version of Pacifique?
Oh, there is an audiobook. The audiobook is in final days of production, actually. It is fantastic. You should definitely watch for it. I might ask James if he has any more info on that to put it in the chat, if he has like a timeline. I'm not sure if he does, but keep an eye out for it because it will be coming soon-ish. Yeah, definitely an audiobook.
Yay, that's amazing. a question from Damien here, who says, "It's been a great conversation. Thank you both. Can you both talk about the editing process? What sorts of things did you focus on, Amanda? Has the manuscript changed much in that process? And Sarah, did you push back against any of Amanda's suggestions?" I can think of a few.
Tell me what I pushed back against.
Oh, actually, it's a few is like an exaggeration. I think it was
Mostly?
yeah, mostly just one, and it was, and you were right. It was about so there are some beautiful sex scenes in Pacifique, and I am sometimes squeamish with sex scenes. So I had suggested a particular edit to the end of a sex scene, and Sarah was like, no, this does not work. And you were absolutely right. So, yeah, you didn't even need an editor really for.
No, that's not true.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Amanda saw, I always had this sense that there was something that I couldn't quite see that was missing. And it was just a little bit of filling out. So we just had a few extra scenes that we needed to fill out. We had a scene with, we had a couple of scenes with Tia and Pacifique. We had a scene with Tia and her mother. There was an additional scene of Andrew in the hospital that I had to write from scratch. All of those times were terrifying because I was writing brand new material. And I hadn't written brand new material on the book in quite a long time. So that had my heart in my throat, but it worked out okay. And then as Amanda suggested these scenes, that sense of it being of something missing just went away because we just kind of built up a little bit more of that life and that world. So Amanda just saw those places that needed filling and had great suggestions, and I went with it, and it worked out every time. So.
I mean, it was quite a lucky experience as an editor, I think, because it was basically done, people. It basically came to me, and it was like this fully fleshed out, beautiful, intricate book. And yeah, there were just those couple of instances where we just went into things a little bit more and put a couple of scenes in. And I know, Sarah, it was a bit of an anxious process for you. I mean, editing when you're the writer always feels like a hugely anxious process because you're writing new stuff and sort of writing to a new version of the book. But I liked it, and it was also great to have the chance to.
Oh yeah, it was a fantastic time. It was fantastic. We worked really hard over about 7 weeks, and it was really fun to put like that kind of effort into a project and see it just come out at the other side with this great manuscript that we could say to Alana, look, it's ready for you.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, we were both very proud of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, it's a genius book. Like it really is an extraordinary piece of work, Sarah, and you should be proud. You really should. There are so many great questions here. I love this one from Melissa. Where did you come up with the name Pacifique?
Oh, that's kind of an interesting story. I was hanging out with a friend in Calgary, and she wanted some marijuana. I did not. And there was a couple of gentlemen who had some marijuana, so they shared a joint. And one of the men was wearing an Argyle sweater, an Argyle vest. I remember that. And his name was Pacifique. And I just was in love with that name. And I think traditionally it's more of a man's name, but obviously that doesn't really matter. I needed Pacifique to have something, sort of ethereal and out there and, dreamy and foreign sounding. So it just was like, that's the perfect name for my mystery woman.
Yeah. It is such a great name.
Well, thank you, Pacifique, of whenever that was, 2007, probably. Hanging out off 17th Avenue in Calgary one summer day.
You never know where the world's going to lead you.
Yeah.
Jessica says, apart from figuring out the book's end, was there anything else about the story of the creative process that surprised you as you wrote, or that you hadn't anticipated when you began?
A lot of things. Like I didn't know who Pacifique really was, besides, she's like a mystery lover, but the details of her came as I wrote, and I was surprised by every single one of them. Her backstory, you don't get any of that in here, but her backstory of where she comes from, it came out in poetry that I wrote during my MFA. I used poetry as a way to get Pacifique's backstory known to me. The ending, like I said, I thought it was done and then it wasn't, that was the kind of thing that would happen throughout.
Mhm.
I also had this vision of Pacifique as being a sort of perfect person. But Dave Margoshes, my mentor, was like, she can't be perfect. There's not enough tension there.
Mhm.
And so I thought, oh, let's make her let's bring her into the real world in a way.
Mhm.
And hence she has a skin disorder, a skin condition. And which works for her because she's both so beautiful and also kind of so outside of the standards of beauty anyway.
Mhm.
But again, that was a surprise to me that she would have something like that. I thought, oh, she's going to be perfect and that's going to be the character, but that's silly.
Mhm.
And I don't think I really understood how the relationship would go with Tia and Andrew until I wrote it in this version. So the depth of their relationship and their care for each other, that didn't develop until I actually wrote it. So I learned about them as I wrote about them.
Mhm. Sometimes that's one of the most exciting parts of
Yeah.
is discovering these people, and you're not so much making them up as just kind of like unearthing them from somewhere and
Yeah.
discovering these new parts of them. Amora asks, do you see a sequel for this novel's concept in the future? Would you make a series on the psychiatrization of folks to further combat saneism?
Yeah, I don't know if I see a sequel necessarily to this exact story, but my next novel is also what I call a madness novel. So a novel that deals with madness, written by someone who's experienced psychiatrization. And it takes quite a different tack. We're not inside a psychiatric institution in that story, or at least not yet as it exists right now. But yeah, I feel like this probably is what I'm going to be writing, at least novel wise.
Mhm.
So there will be more. Yeah, Amora, if you have an idea for how I could make this book into a sequel, let me know.
Next, a question from Kevin, who says, I really enjoyed the reading, Sarah, and I have ordered your book. How has living in New Zealand affected the writing of Pacifique?
It was quite, it's been strange. Yeah, it's been strange to be so far away from the place where I set the book. And I'm in, but it's also been useful being near an ocean. So I'm still got the ocean here. I put my hand on the book like the sea is in it. I still have the ocean here, and technology brings us so close together. Like when Amanda and I were editing, we'd sort out our time zones and we would chat at a time that worked for both of us. I was up really early in the morning working, and so it didn't feel like we were so far away. As for it's been interesting working with North American language, because with my new novel, I'm working more with New Zealand dialect and New Zealand slang. And even spelling and stuff. So even just doing the back and forth of spelling was just kind of a fun mental game, probably, helped my brain in some respects. But in some ways, you can live anywhere in the world and write any book now. but in other ways, this is very much like a Canadian book that it would have been interesting. It would have been nice to have been able to sort of release it out over in Canada, but maybe next time.
Maybe next time. One final question from Melissa, who says, your dedication was beautiful. Can you tell us about your wonderful uncle to whom you dedicated your book?
Did you say that to make me cry, Melissa? So when I was locked up in the psychiatric ward, my uncle came over from Vancouver and he sat down next to me and he said, do you need a lawyer? And I said, yes, I need a lawyer. I've just been locked up against my will. I don't know what's going on. And he worked for me, obviously for free, because I didn't have to pay. He worked for me to help me get out of that place earlier than they said I'd be locked up for a month through Christmas. And he said that he's helped me get paperwork done. He helped me get a hearing, organize a hearing to contest my committal. And anyway, so because of him, I was only in the psych ward for 18 days, which is 18 days too long, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But, and he was always, from when I was very young to when he died, just understood that there was something different about me, and there was never any judgment from him about it. In fact, he celebrated the ways that I was weird. And so it was just a natural, dedication to make.
Well, I love that because look at what you have given the world here. This book is a celebration of the ways that certainly the characters in the book are weird and extraordinary and different, and so much of that is going out into the world now with every person who reads it. And I just want to take this moment, Sarah, to say thank you so much for this gift that you have given to the world. It has been such a huge pleasure and such an honor to work on the book with you, and an honor to share this space with you tonight and to celebrate you in all of the ways that you deserve. James, I'm going to call you back now because we are sadly at that time where we have to close down the event. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Sarah, for being here and for being so generous with your answers to these questions. It has been so lovely sharing this space with all of you. And buy the book if you haven't already, and talk about it to your friends. And yes, look out for the audiobook, which is coming soon to an MP3 device, or no, we're way past MP3 device. Coming soon to, an audiobook purveyor near you.
Sarah, on behalf of Coachos, I just wanted to say thank you for your beautiful reading tonight, all your beautiful stories, your words. It's been an absolute privilege to have been even a small part on this book. So congratulations. Amanda, thank you for being the hostess with the mostest for us this evening. And thank you to the audience. Thank you for everyone who came and showed up tonight, and for your beautiful questions as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.